Hello, and welcome to the final episode of Fear and Loathing in the Windy City before the Illinois primary. The show was started explicitly because Chicago politics is famous for its gamemanship and how it affects national discourse and the overall structure of the Democratic Party. We've been getting into the weeds and having guests on to explain and illuminate a lot of this history and dynamics. We hope that all 27 of our dedicated viewers are up to speed about what's happening. We've seen in the last couple of weeks that all the candidates have consolidated behind one chosen establishment candidate in Joe Biden. Joe Biden now is in a neck-to-neck race with Bernie Sanders. He had a very good Super Tuesday. He had a very good, I think it's called a not so Super Tuesday.
The Mini Tuesday.
Mini Tuesday. So Joe Biden's last couple Tuesdays have been pretty decent for him in the delegate game, but not even half the delegates in the entire race have been given out. Illinois is a very delegate-rich state. However, considering the fact that so many campaigns have been active here, pouring tons of money here, and with a lot of insiders helping them, and all those insiders now consolidating behind Joe Biden, we are kind of bracing for what might be another difficult Tuesday next week, and how do we continue from there? Some people think that Bernie Sanders has absolutely no path and that he should be dropping out to endorse Joe Biden in order to beat Bernie Sanders. If you're on this channel, I'm pretty sure you vehemently disagree with that for many different reasons. It's also just bad policy, in my opinion, because a bad move for a party that had been hysterical about Russia's interference in our elections. That conversation kind of mummed from the national discourse at the moment. The legitimacy of the democratic process and the United States of America is at risk because we see in real time how farcical it is, how on the whims of media personalities, so much of decision-making gets made during election season, and how much logistically organizing a process so that people can vote in a country where we put on tons of concerts and tons of stadium games all the time, tons of events, trying to organize something that happens like clockwork every couple years, still disenfranchises people from the democratic process. Consolidating at this moment behind Joe Biden, suspending the debates, creating a rampway for Joe Biden to confront his doom in Donald Trump will do far more damage for the very notion of democracy on the global stage, in my opinion, which plays into the hands of autocratic governments like in Russia, like in China, like in Saudi Arabia, like in Brazil, like in the United States of America. With that, I mean, I think people at Hard Lens Media have been talking a lot more nuance about the many different aspects of what's coming out of tomorrow and the dynamics that are changing in real time. Daniel.
Yeah, so at this point, our position is that Sanders doesn't have a clear path to victory. He looks like from Michigan that he's lost the Midwest. New York's probably going to be not that favorable either. Granted, not even half the votes have been counted, but they're trending in a very specific direction. And as people, again, one thing I say on the show a lot is that perception drives reality. Oh. And if people perceive that Sanders is not going to win and Biden will, that does it. I mean, the thing that we saw that I was talking about earlier on the show today is that there was a period, and this is the only time I've seen it happen in modern American history, where the establishment started to bend a knee to Sanders. That was right after Nevada. Mm-hmm. And they were bending, and Sanders should have taken advantage of it. Mm-hmm. He didn't. Mm-hmm. And that was a mistake. And I think the big thing that I was expecting out of Sanders was more fight and more challenging the establishment when they did things, such as we were talking before, that most of the exit polls that have occurred are off by more than 2%. And if you look at the UN, mm-hmm. the UN says that if exit polls are off by more than 2%, it's a fraudulent election. Texas, they were off by 16%. And it's Massachusetts, they were off by a lot as well.
Jeez.
And many states, I mean, they're basically off in every single state. And that, of course, means that even if Sanders wins 60% of the vote, it might not matter. It might not matter at all. And that's why I was saying, what I've been saying on the show a lot is that it's up to the Sanders team to call that out when it happens and when they see it and they aren't.
Right.
They're getting hit and they're like, that's okay. I'm not going to strike back at you.
Yeah.
And that was a great mistake. So now you had this window of like a week where he really could have consolidated. He could have done some talk behind closed doors with people. He could have reached out to Clyburn at least once. He didn't even do that, from what I heard. And tried a little bit to get South Carolina, but it really seems like Clyburn was the linchpin that let all of this happen.
Yes.
And if Sanders had gotten him to not endorse, or he had gotten him to endorse him, we would have a very different conversation right now. Then he would have won Super Tuesday. And even the other thing was what they built their strategy on. It's a crowded field like the Republicans had in the last election. Let's win 30% of all the states, and then we go in with the most people and we win. And instead, I didn't expect this. I don't think anyone did. Everyone consolidated behind Joe Biden.
Right.
And at the same time, Elizabeth Warren, being the person with the strongest backbone on the planet, decided that she was going to do the one thing that would not give her an advantage unless there's a deal behind the scenes. And that is stay in, split the progressive vote while the establishment vote is consolidated. And, well, it worked. They got the wins they needed. They changed everything. The establishment vote locked in place. The suburbanites came out to vote in record numbers, and they still are. And millennials, the youth, didn't really show up any more than they did in 2016, which was
I want to challenge that a little bit. We're seeing that the youth turnout did increase significantly in Texas and Virginia.
Yes.
But so did older voter turnout in the primary.
That's what I mean, that it was outshadowed. That generally speaking, in a few states, like in Iowa, it was like 30% more. Like granted, there are specific states that youth turnout shot up. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I'm saying an overall trend was it really wasn't that different in many, many states. Right. Texas it was, but at the same time, they closed half the voting stations in Texas. The amount of turnout they got in Texas, as an example, was overshadowed by the middle class turnout, the suburbanite turnout.
Right.
And then that all happened. The consolidation of all the candidates behind Biden. You had Elizabeth Warren splitting the vote. Then you have that. Then everyone's mind is made up, and we just saw that in the Tuesday's election.
Well, and I do want to challenge that a little bit. Everyone's mind is made up. The media's mind has been made up. Elizabeth Warren could have listened to millions of people that have been working for years in a movement. At any time. Maybe she will at some point or this next week. We don't know. So far, no. But Bernie Sanders even getting to this point was a pipe dream.
Oh, no,
and
definitely.
It was definitely a pipe dream just 4 years ago. And look at what he's done. I mean, like Michael Bloomberg having to drop out and endorse Biden. Remember, Michael Bloomberg jumped in, poured $500 million because he knew Joe Biden sucked.
Yeah.
And he couldn't beat Trump. And said, I guess I got to do it.
Yeah.
And then having him, eat crow and suck up his ego. He's got, he's the 9th richest man in the world. I'm sure it's not easy to suck up his ego. It's not a very light thing to just drop out, but he did. Bernie Sanders really bent the political class, the billionaire class a bit in this run. Now the only thing that is stopping him is an overwhelmingly strong media narrative because they're actually reporting on facts for a change, just bare bone facts.
Yes.
And that makes it seem the truth so powerful when they start doing that for a change. Because Joe Biden now has unilateral support from everyone in the party, everyone just forgets everything they've been saying about him for the last 3 years. And because, Joe is now leading into delegate-rich states with this momentum, and he will be probably trouncing Bernie in a lot of these races. Things look grim, sure. Not insurmountable. And I would only say that Clyburn, being the linchpin that he was, and being quite the political savvy operative that he seems to be, immediately calling for a suspension of debates.
Right.
Kind of tells you where the Achilles heel in this whole plan from the establishment is at. Get Joe Biden in front of a camera next to Bernie Sanders. And oh no, that's not going to go well.
So on that point, we agree completely. Like the way I look at it, like I base the path on what is probable, where momentum is, things that are reliably predictable. Is there a scenario, or are there a dozen scenarios where Joe Biden goes on camera to Bernie Sanders and just looks like a fool, and everyone goes, "That's the guy we're gonna vote in." No, I'm gonna go back to Bernie Sanders. That's a possibility that could happen. Biden could get sick. Biden could get hit by a meteor. There are a thousand things that could happen. And I will say that they are much more probable than just about any other candidate I've had to deal with, especially because you're right. Their big strategy with him is, which is very similar to Hillary's strategy, is don't put him in front of a camera. Just don't put him in front of a camera. They're having him speak for 7 minutes at a time at these rallies that he's at. He's mostly speaking behind closed doors. So I grant you that there are a lot of instances and possibilities and paths that Biden falls, but there isn't, to me at least right now, there isn't a path where Bernie can rise. And that's the distinction I make, that I'm going to put effort, I'm going to put not effort into, but I'm going to put my predictions into where I think a path is.
Yes.
And I don't put predictions into, well, that person might fall down and maybe if this happens or that happens.
Yeah.
But it's the least unlikely of the other times that I've seen it happen. So it could happen. I'm not putting it away, but I'm not betting any hope on it.
I mean, and I agree with that analysis completely. I think that is a take of most people, I mean, myself being like, well, I mean, Joe Biden's trying to stand up straight till November, and that's a long time.
And the debates, they're like, we want to have a sitting debate, a sitting forum.
Okay. And now here's the thing, though. I mean, Bernie Sanders does have an opportunity to rise. If the media treated him with any kind of modicum of respect and seriousness for the issues, and they won't, but that is the avenue traditionally where people rise. You mentioned after Nevada, the establishment was bending the knee because factually they had to.
Yeah,
they just had to. Even Michael Bloomberg, and they kind of stacked the whole South Carolina debate to go for Michael Bloomberg. At that point, if people are already thinking that cynically, why not just make a deal with, okay, we can do Joe Biden and just use Bloomberg's money? Like, we don't want to have that guy that was talking just be president.
You know what's crazy to me right now? Joe Biden's, at least the cabinet that he's talked about assembling so far, is richer than Trump's cabinet.
Yeah.
That blows my mind.
Right. Well, these are the what is it? The civility billionaires, right?
Of course, they're very nice people. They speak nice. I mean, it doesn't matter they have private prison. That's the thing that I talk about on the show. That isn't it crazy that we live in a world where, like, some kid can go into a school with a gun and kill a bunch of people, and that's a huge travesty. That, rightly so, that we all are like, this is terrible, we all have to worry about. But a lawmaker can pass a bill that kills 100,000 people, or passes a war that had no basis that kills 500,000 people, and everyone's like, that's a good person, he should get reelected.
Right.
This is what some people say, the ethical billionaire. That's what goes through my mind. It's like, I mean, do we need our billionaires to go into a place and shoot people on Fifth Avenue, as an example?
Right. Now, so there goes to my next point. Bernie's ability to rise. There's legitimacy to him taking on the billionaire class. There's a legitimacy that our media does not actually want to watch. And they rather talk about supporters of Bernie Sanders being rude online. And I don't know a group of people that have been erased and demoralized and attacked by the media more so than Bernie Sanders supporters, for these last couple of years. And yet we're supposed to be gracious and begging for help, which does bring me to Elizabeth Warren. I still want her endorsement. I still like Elizabeth Warren. I do like her background and her record. And Bernie's team hasn't earned her endorsement yet. However, I am disappointed that the gravity of the situation to pass progressive policy at this moment, this failure to rise to a call to action from millions of people that have cast their votes for progressive policies that are closer to Elizabeth Warren's brand, hasn't moved the senator. And that's a bet that she's making in too. But saying that, again, these are dynamics that also play into the long-term plans of Bernie Sanders's long-term game, which is informing young people and the American public about the realities of our democracy, how it actually works and disenfranchises you, and how it is really up to us collectively. We do have the ability and power to change these realities. He will go down in history as leading those fights.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Like, so one thing I also said in the show is that even if just for a second we say that this is it, he's not going to win the nomination. There's no chance. Even though again there is a chance, it's just not a clear path.
Mm-hmm.
Sanders has planted enough seeds to grow forest.
Mm-hmm.
He has. The amount of people that are currently in Congress because of him is immense. The amount of people that are currently running to be in Congress is also immense. He's won on all the ideas. We were talking about how even in the Democratic and all the primaries, even Mississippi, majority of Democrats want Medicare for all.
Right.
And he's won. He's got the issues. He's nailed. He's controlled
DNC
that.
hates to hear it.
He hates to hear it, but he has won the generation that is growing. He has won the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
You look at, he's a generational candidate. The people that are voting against him, that do not like him,
Mm-hmm.
are a demographic that will be smaller as time goes on.
Yeah.
Whereas the demographic that is coming up, that will be raising children, are the demographic that believed and were convinced and adjusted by Bernie Sanders. So if the question is, did Bernie Sanders win this election cycle? Yeah, well, first, he won it much more than he did in 2016.
Yeah.
And he still has a possible narrow, undefined
does.
path that is there. Has he won the future? Have people taken the ideas and the idea of non-corruption, the idea of Medicare for all, of college tuition, all those things? He's completely won that fight. He won that in 2016. So either way, I think he will be looked at like just in a very similar way to even like MLK. MLK was despised by the right.
Mm-hmm.
He was either annoyed or despised by the center.
Right.
And he was annoyed or liked by the left, depending on who you were. And Bernie Sanders is in a similar sort of vein. But what will happen is in the future, looking back, what people will say 10, 20 years from now is, God damn it, guys, why didn't you pick Bernie Sanders? It was so obvious that that's what we needed.
Yeah. And that's why I think that it's incumbent right now on the movement to continue with these discussions in real time. I have a guest today who will be speaking a little bit about the Warren Bernie would-be coalition and divide. And we'll be talking about a lot more things. But it is plain to history at this point. I mean, it always has been for a lot of us these last couple of years. This was a very short window of time between 2016 and 2020 between a Russian cyber attack that called the legitimacy of our perceived reality, but our democracy into question. What seemed like a schism at the highest rankings of our intelligence communities, putting the selection of our most powerful executive office in our country in a precarious place. Out of that anxiety, out of that tension, out of people being so lost into what to think, fighting for the history of the issues that banded us together has been what a lot of us have been about. And in that vein, a lot of people that work on those issues were either supporting Bernie Sanders, some were with Tulsi Gabbard, some were supporting Andrew Yang, but a good portion of them were also with Elizabeth Warren. And I'd like to introduce my next guest, who endorsed Elizabeth Warren and worked very hard for her in Illinois recently this week, since she has dropped out, has endorsed Bernie Sanders, also political chair of the Marie Newman campaign and former candidate of 14th Ward for Alderman Jose Torrez. Jose, thank you.
Thank you, Tocayo, which means same name in Spanish. I'll try to live up to that fabulous introduction.
Oh, you're very good with your words. I thought I'd give you the floor there because there's a lot to work with. You'd like to introduce yourself and all that
Yeah.
we can talk about.
Grown Southwest Side. Went to high school named Cristo Rey Jesuit High School, which was a model for the nation now in the Jesuit model of education. DePaul University, live in Archer Heights. Ran for alderman, endorsed Elizabeth Warren, endorsed Bernie Sanders. Worked very hard for Marie the first time, and now it's the honor of my lifetime to serve as her political chair for the 3rd District.
Awesome. Happy to have you here on the show.
I'm
Thank you so
happy
much
to be
for
here. Absolutely.
Thank you. A lot to talk about. We first met during the 14th Ward race, but because there's so much nationally going on,
Yeah.
I did want to ask about Marie's race, but I'd like to start a little bit, with the theme of the night. There's a national election. People seem to be consolidating behind Biden, but you still endorse Bernie Sanders.
I did, yes.
Yeah. Do you think he has a viable chance?
It's a narrow lead that Biden has. I still think it's up in the air. But I think the movement, the stories that are being told, to quote the gentleman that was here earlier, the victory is going to lie in the future. So we're going to see Bernie Sanders' history and his essence championed by someone in the next 10 years. And the progressive movement is going to end up in the White House. I don't know if this is the year. I hope it is, right, for progressive values and progressive politics. But ultimately, if it's not, Joe Biden's going to have to react to the left if he wants to win the election. And he's going to have to do something that Hillary did late in the campaign, and some say didn't do it at all, which is acknowledge that there's a progressive base out there that want progressive politics in the national executive office, which is the president in the White House.
Definitely. And, you've been working, you've worked with Jesus Garcia's people, you've worked with Marie Newman's people, you've worked with Warren's people, Bernie's people. This seems like a natural coalition that should be consolidating their resources.
Yeah, it should. We should.
We should.
Progressives should be fighting with others to defeat the machine.
Right. Any insight into maybe why that's been so difficult to have
I
happen?
think passions are high. Everybody has a story to tell and a reason why they want to run. And, when the progressive movement started 50, 60 years ago, right, in the community, and then community leaders got elected, and real progressive power started happening, there was an essence of who you wanted to be for and who you wanted to be against. And as we kind of use the progressive word more often, and people like Acevedo take it and use it as, a mantra of the campaign, it becomes not just who's more progressive, but also who's more independent, which I think is going to kind of shape the next few years of politics. Progressives, no problem with them. I think all progressives are doing amazing work. We just got to stop getting in each other's way.
And who got in whose way? Elizabeth Warren got in Bernie's way, or has Bernie been getting in her way?
I think the passions there are just too great. I don't think anybody got in each other's way. I think what happened was that there was just not a solid conversation the second time around when it came for running for president. I think both of them wanted to do it for their respective reasons, and I'm never one to tell someone not to run for office. I mean, I think if you have dreams of becoming an alderman, a senator, president, go and do it and work hard, work your butt off. But I would have hoped that by now we would have been able to really build unity around the progressive movement at a national level early on, so that we decide how we're going to run this campaign, this progressive campaign.
That's what so many people thought was kind of in the works. We saw that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders play to each other's talking points and issues, in some debates when the establishment was unified against them. That seems to have broken down completely. You've been inside the Warren campaign. Do you think there's truth that Twitter trolls are the reason that progressive issues in the United States of America are dead for the next couple election cycles?
I wouldn't call them dead. I think that's a very strong word.
Sure.
I think they're sunsetted for now. Because of the national level, we're not going to have an executive. I think Joe might actually be the nominee, but I hope not. I hope it's Bernie. So I want to use the word sunsetted because it means we could rise again. We could come back and take back the White House in 4 years and 8 years when we're able to reconsolidate ourselves and lick our wounds and be able to really get back up and fight. But, if there's one thing we learned with Trump is that words matter. And it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And it's not just how you say it, but how you write it. Right? One thing I learned when I was running is everybody reads your message with their own internal voice. And even if you try to make it as nice as possible, they'll read it bad if they take it bad, and they'll read it well if they take it well. And so I think it's very difficult for campaign leaders and candidates to control the base because you want to tell them, behave, be nice, let's play good, we're on the same team. but you can't also be a dictator. You can't tell them what to think and what to do. I do think there has to be a conversation about being nice and spreading love instead of antagonism.
Sure.
And I hope that's something we do before the next election happens, the next presidential election.
But we've had these conversations in America already. People used to decry riots during the civil rights movement, and the quote is famously, broken windows, glass, riots are the voices
Yeah.
of the unheard. We don't have broken glass, we don't have riots, we have much less violence, political violence, than we did in the 70s. We have Twitter trolls now.
Correct. And I don't want to say that your thoughts shouldn't be heard. Everybody has the opinion that matters to them, right? But I think it's just that we have a platform that is very new to us. Right? 10 years ago, Twitter wasn't as popular as it is now. You wouldn't be getting briefings from the president on Twitter or middle of the night executive orders on
Right.
Twitter, right? So I think that kind of changed the game a little bit. We kind of have to have a understanding of what tools we want to use when we're running people for office or running ourselves for office and supporting, so that we do project our progressive values, but don't antagonize someone else who we may agree on how they're doing it, not just exactly what they're saying.
Right. It does seems like there was a very marked difference in how Elizabeth Warren and how Bernie Sanders have conducted their campaigns. You speak about running for office. You spoke about Donald Trump introducing Twitter. I mean, the way he's run his campaign, he basically was running for president since 2012.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
took the Republican establishment by surprise. And they were feeling and seeing what their voting base was feeling. And they didn't want to repeat of Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
And they just let him do it.
Yeah.
And do you think that he has the same gusto to do it again?
To win the election or to...
I mean, impeachment seems to have fallen apart.
Yeah.
He took a huge gamble in Iran that seems to be paying off for him.
Yes.
The coronavirus is a problem, and it is affecting the stock market.
It really is. It's affecting
He
everybody.
can blame the Democrats, and it'd be a total lie, and his own base will buy it and repeat it
Yeah.
to your face
Yeah.
ad nauseum. And in what world does Joe Biden beat that?
Well, I'll tell you this. One thing that Trump knows is he knows his base, and he knows as he's talking to him. When you and I see our videos, we know he's not talking to us, so
Right.
we dismiss it. I think Joe Biden has to, as Michelle Obama said, go up when he goes low, and really demonstrate the presidential candidate he was in '08, and go back to his roots of really the working class, and talking about, Pennsylvania and the coal mines, right? That kind of work, that kind of stuff, that kind of work really gets out there, because look at the work he did around helping with health insurance around that area at that time. It wasn't as progressive as it is now. I mean, Dennis Kucinich was by far my favorite candidate of all time. So he didn't come anywhere near that. But we need to beat Trump where we know he's going to be good at, and that's in the middle class, it's in the Rust Belt, that's going to be in the Midwest, and it's going to be in the coasts.
Well, Donald Trump certainly not popular, and the high population areas that helped Hillary Clinton win the popular vote.
Yeah.
But he saw that an electoral college strategy really paid off for him, maybe accidentally. And I don't think the RNC.
I would call it more than an accident.
And I meant to mention this when Daniel was here, but it also seems like Eric Prince, of the billionaire dynasty out of Michigan, brother of Betsy DeVos, has been paying organizations like Project Veritas, a right-wing trolling organization that infiltrates leftist, progressive, and unions groups in order to sabotage them or expose them and their leftist agenda. Eric Prince has not only been funding them, he's been having former spies, MI6 spies, train them for infiltration. Again, in what world does a cobbled narrative about Joe Biden, I mean, his working class background from Pennsylvania, and this maybe '08 was the best campaign he ever ran. He lost.
Of all time.
He lost.
And he lost.
He lost. And
I mean, Barack's is just so much better.
well, Barack wanted to take on the whole political establishment, didn't he?
hindsight, right?
You know,
In
he
hindsight, we
did kind
would
of,
know better.
that wasn't
We all should have voted for
uncivil
Kucinich.
back then. Maybe to Hillary Clinton, he did have Citibank, banking
Yeah.
him. So maybe that was the difference between his way of taking on the establishment and Bernie's way. But it just seems like, I'm big on story arcs, and I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of history that we like to tell in story arcs. We like to, as human beings, we're naturally like understand ourselves and our history and our identity through stories.
Yeah.
America's in the middle of a tumultuous story right now.
Yeah.
And depending on who you are, you're looking at a different story. You have a different narrative arc. There are many similar figures, but different people are heroes, different people are villains, different people are doing things. It just seems that in the WrestleMania politics that
love
Donald
that.
Trump has embraced, enabled, and really stepped into his own with, the story arc that he has been telling about himself
Yeah. For
beats
decades.
and since 2012 beats whatever the heck the DNC cobbles up behind Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And it seems that the people on the ground that have been protesting since Occupy Wall Street
Yeah.
have been organizing in their communities in major cities.
Deep organizing.
Deep organizing within the trenches of our urban, municipalities
Yeah,
to really get
yeah.
into the nuance of local policy making, and leveling that up to the national.
Absolutely.
There's a story arc there that has culminated into making Bernie Sanders the nominee.
Yes, 100%.
And it seems like Joe Biden's DNC and people like Tom Perez, and I actually don't know where Obama is in a lot of things. Everything I hear does not seem like he's very helpful at this at all.
Yeah.
That exact is what I get. But I hang out with a lot of Chuy Garcia people, and there's a lot of feelings. My thing is that that's the narrative, that's the story arc of the American population, that if it were to win and get into the White House, it would be better for American history on the global stage. It's a real reflection of the best in America.
Correct.
And that's precisely what Joe Biden is working overtime to destroy when he says he's going to veto
Correct.
Medicare for all.
Yeah.
That's what representatives that might have a storied history on their own right, like Representative Clyburn,
Yeah.
maybe feel like they're doing the right thing. They're also destroying that story arc and enabling Donald
Complete
Trump's
opposite and everything that
I
we
feel like there's
don't
going to
hold
be
near.
there's going to be a real come to Jesus moment that the establishment wants Bernie Sanders people to feel about. You lost because of yourself, but we lost an election.
Wow.
They could lose the very notion of democracy.
Correct. And see, that's
Because
what
of their
that's what I
conduct.
fear. So I too love the arc of narratives and stories. So, I'll tell you two different things. One a personal story of mine, and the other one an analysis. I did political science at DePaul University. Got a master's in nonprofit management and political analysis. And so, one of my works in DePaul was analyzing the political parties and looking at, what way they're shifting and how the bases are turning into political power and consolidation of different things. And so, I believe that even though the left is the liberals and the right are the conservatives, the RNC is a little bit more liberal than the DNC in their process of nomination because they got out of the way and let everybody fall out, and we ended up with Trump, which is horrible. But can you imagine if the DNC got out of the way and let Bernie, Warren, and everybody else fight it out without putting any money, without paying any media, and allowing them to debate and let the people actually choose the narrative they want to hear? I think right now, I don't even think if Biden would be in the race. So that's one analysis of it. The other part was the Tea Party. When I was organizing for the Illinois Coalition of Immigrant Refugee Rights, ICER, I was organizing in Joliet. Not too far from there is New Lenox, Illinois. Many people don't know this, but New Lenox was the birth of the Tea Party movement. It was an anti-Obama, everything that we held near and dear to us. They wanted to take back the House. They wanted to make America great again before Trump went with that message. And their entire message was anti everything that you and I hold dear. And so that narrative ended up doing something that Trump heard over time and used it as a marketing strategy before he ran. I really think that's where the birth certificate thing was such a thing. It wasn't an anti-Obama thing. It was a racist thing. It was an anti-immigrant thing. It was our immigration laws is broken thing, and it's his fault and everybody who's blue's fault. So I'm your only option. But we look at 4 years of Trump, and we've seen a disaster, a social disaster, and now we're looking to see at the market, which is probably going to end up crashing because of the whole coronavirus and the mismanagement of everything that he's done. So that takes us to the parties at bay. And, it's part of the reason why George Washington did not want parties, and part of the reason why our founding fathers did not want parties, and it's part of the reason why Mexico had the PRI for 71 years, because when you have dedazos, you have Joe Bidens, you have Hillary Clintons, you have Barack Obamas, you have people who get that back-ended deal later on in life to become president. And we're ending up in a movement where we're having the establishment versus the independents, right? And Bernie's pretty much carrying on that fight. He's looking at what is his path to victory, and it's narrowing, but it might still be there. But the beautiful part about it, I think, is that even though we didn't get elimination of all the super delegates, we were able to eliminate them in the first round. But we were also able to really create an antidote for how this process goes. And I think that's why Bernie's doing well up to now, as opposed to last time when Michigan was his Hail Mary, right? However, I do think that the rules have to be changed. The party chairs have to be changed. We need to elect people and appoint people who understand what the future wants, what the 15 and 20-year-olds want, so they could create the narrative for the party for the next 30, 40 years. Because what's going to end up happening is the party's going to break into two, or the Republicans are going to start winning, and we don't want any of that.
Well, I think that we've survived things like that. This country certainly has seen that, and the billionaire class that the Democratic Party seems to be adhering to might be more comfortable with that. And it seems that it's their comfort that really takes priority. You say that there's going to be a split between establishment and independents. What do you mean by independents?
Independents as like AOC, individuals who ran and fought hard and talked about the fight that they bring on.
But she is part of the Democratic Party.
She is, because she has to. But if she would have ran as a independent party, it'd be a different race.
Sure, but she have won.
That's a question that I don't know how to answer.
Yeah,
I don't want it. We may or may not want it to get to that.
Yeah,
I mean, how many parties have existed in the past, right?
I mean, would you consider Ron Paul an independent?
I think Ron Paul was the closest thing to an independent the Republican Party ever had.
Yeah,
in this past 40, 50 years.
Ross Perot, well, he's Mr.
He's
Independent.
a billionaire. He started the billionaire movement.
Yeah, the whole independent movement. I
other
mean,
billionaires saw him.
I don't
do
know
it
if that's
and
the
thought,
company that
too.
I would put AOC in, but that's just my problem with the word independent. I mean,
Well, it means a lot of things to different people, right? To me,
Because it
means
should.
someone. Yeah, to me, and I'll tell you my version of independent. It means that you're able to respond to the people that got you elected, not the party chairs or the party leaders, but those individuals are going to send you back. Her motto of being able to call her constituents, as opposed to calling her donors, and be able to develop that base of fundraising has really resonated of the independent congresswoman who does not need party leaders to get reelected.
and we're all rooting for AOC and for her to do well.
And
I'm
we know
sure the
she's getting
Democrats.
primaried like hell.
She's getting primaried and probably going to see a lot of games around her district, around the census, and that's the Democratic Party, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
But speaking of Democratic Party and what's wrong with it, you are ingrained in Marie Newman's campaign, who's taking on the most conservative Democrat in the nation, in Dan Lipinski.
Yes.
How's been organizing in the belly of the beast of the Chicago Machine?
Well, it's been a lot of fun, in a lot of good and bad ways. The machine is ruthless. When I was running for alderman, they were popping my tires and scratching my car. And last time that Marie was running, they were scratching her car and breaking into her office. I think this time they know that no matter what they do, they're not going to stop us. So all they did now was cut our power.
I did see that.
Yeah, it took some scissors and cut our power, however they did it, right? But I think that we're on the cusp of history. We're taking on the most anti-immigrant, conservative, anti-LGBTQ, anti-women's rights, blue dog left probably in the nation. And next to, Cuellar and all those individuals, but in the Midwest. But the difference between this race and other races is that the machine is really embedded in Dan Lipinski's race. So you have individuals who, like Madigan, who call themselves progressive and want to be with progressives, but are defending an individual who is the complete opposite of everything that Madigan wants to be.
Wow.
And us taking on
Madigan progressive. That's a rough one.
right? Well, I mean,
That's rough.
he claims to be, but we all know the difference.
Well, he's a mafia boss. If he wants to
Exactly.
be progressive, who's going to argue? It's just like,
Well, we are going to argue. That's why we're taking on him, and we're not scared.
that's good. That's great.
I mean, I
And
don't know
why?
if you saw,
Why
we
do you
took
think
a selfie in front of his house?
that was pretty fun? And Madigan loves his neighborhood. That's all it's about.
Too bad he's a Cubs fan. You should know better. That's a Southsider.
That's wrong. But what you call it? Dan Lipinski also sits on the transportation committee.
He does.
The transportation committee, as I understand it, is set no matter who's president, whether it's Joe Biden, Trump, or Bernie. Trillions of dollars in infrastructure need to be passed. They really should have been passed during Obama's presidency.
Yeah.
The Republicans and Mitch McConnell worked overtime to keep that from Obama's
And Dan Lipinski.
and Dan Lipinski. Wow.
Let's not forget that one.
And, I do want to give Obama some cover of saying that, he was working with this Democratic Party that we all see how badly they suck. So he did have to deal with that. But all the same, it seems, are people like Madigan really risking
Losing someone from that seat.
losing someone from that seat that would prioritize where transportation
Yeah.
money gets allocated?
Well, absolutely not, because we have 100% confidence that Marie will be appointed to that committee, first of all. Second of all, Dan sitting on that seat right now is like he's not, like him not even being on that seat, because he's using all the time in the Transportation Committee to fight to eliminate abortion rights,
Aye.
to eliminate LGBTQ protections, to eliminate eliminate any kind of immigration protections. I mean, while sitting on the Transportation Committee, instead of fixing that bridge by our house on Archer between Colin and Kildare, every election cycle he takes a picture of that train and says, "I'm going to put a bridge here." 2 years later, same picture. This entire I've been taking it down. This entire cycle, I've been stopped at least close to 55 times.
Wow.
And that's in between going back and forth between our offices and get Garfield Ridge and back to McKinley Park. But my point is,
Chicago's finest just kind of give you a warning and let you on your way? Or?
right? Well, I've been stopped by the train,
Right.
right? And that's a 5-10 minute stop
All right.
each time. Can you imagine ambulances having to go around? You've driven that. How do you get around that bridge? You go all the way down 47th, or
Yeah.
you go all the way down 55th.
Yeah.
And if you have to get to an emergency to Curie or anything else, that's
Yeah.
a 20-minute delay. And God forbid you hit traffic on
That train made
47th.
me late for work today, actually.
Right? See?
Yeah.
So him being on that transportation committee, advocating for everything else but transportation, will make no difference, because Marie's going to be a champion for that.
And I
She's
like.
analyzed the Southwest side.
I don't. I try to be very impartial during
Yeah.
elections as best as I can. But I do live in the 3rd district. I am voting for Marie Newman.
Thank you.
I do think, and I like Marie very much. She speaks very well on the issues, and it's not an easy district to try to,
No, it's not.
to be the kind of brand that she's really pushing to be. To get a little nuanced, like Dan Lipinski is also under attack because, he's really bad on identity issues, LGBTQ, with women and with the Latino community, and Marie Newman really is the antithesis of that. And this is something that I was speaking to someone, and I don't know if two brown men should be speaking to this, but the notion that Elizabeth Warren, she brought in a type of revolution,
Yeah.
and being a women candidate that's very progressive,
Yes.
and for all the notions of what the establishment is and is not, she did kind of come in on a media campaign, not through insider glad handing.
Yeah.
She is kind of came in as a bit of an outsider in her
Yeah.
own right.
Yeah.
But there seems to be an effort from everyone, but it seems like the Warren campaign is the only campaign that could really speak to women on Bernie's campaign being erased from the conversation altogether. And I think that one of the things, and I just want to say this now that she's out of the race, one of the reasons that they didn't, speak for like women's solidarity was that a lot of the women that support Bernie are women of color. And a lot of women that were supporting Warren and are like hardcore Warren stans tend to be suburban white women. And is there a way to bring these coalitions together? Because they're fighting for the same issues, but from very different perspectives. And who is it incumbent on to understand who? Again, I don't know if we're equipped to really answer that, but I thought we'd give it a shot.
Well, I don't think we'll find an answer today, but I'll tell you one thing that attracted me to the Warren campaign. As you know, your cousin Tonatine was the political director, and she did a fabulous job.
Right.
And one of the things that I really enjoyed about Warren's campaign is that they looked at who they wanted to elect, who they wanted to help get her across the finish line, and a lot of them were minorities who they hired because they were in touch with the deep roots of what's happening in the city. And they really paid attention to what was happening around that. So that attracted me immediately. And then the infrastructure that she had built from the ground up was amazing. It was so strategic. If we got something that needed to go to the press within 24 hours, we'd hear back, do it, go here, do that. It was such a fast campaign. Unfortunately, the momentum wasn't there. But if we look at Marie as an example of this, right, the first time she ran, the machine did so much misogynistic things to her because she's a woman. They tried to intimidate her. They thought that they could fear her into not running again. What did she do in between her break? She endorsed me. She endorsed Berto. She worked her butt off for us. And then she came back and said, hey, I'm running again. I'm not afraid of pissing anybody off. And here she goes again, going after the machine. And I think that's something to tell you that, a lot of the people making progressive changes nowadays are women. They're way more brave than men.
Well, and Congress should be 50% women.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy that you came on the show, and hopefully we get Marie into office.
I hope so.
And I just wanted to sign off. Thank you to my guest, Jose Torres. Thank you so much to our viewers. There's like 50-something viewers on the regular. But thank you so much for tuning to this show. This will be our last show before the election. We'll be talking more about urban planning and city municipal issues when the show continues. Thank you for tuning in. If you're in Illinois, please vote for Marie Newman. Please vote for Bernie Sanders. Be safe. Peace.
Thank you.